Yes, it's been a while. What do you want me to do? Make a video? I've wanted to talk about this for a while. It is a subject that is very assumed about, and I feel like not a lot of people have some great solid evidence or great solid facts about this subject and why this pattern is very occurrent or very repeating or very present in scootering. And that is that scooter decks are expensive or cost money. And I feel like a lot of people don't have very good answers for this, because a lot of people say like, oh, just because it says someone's name on this deck, it jacks at $10. And sometimes, yes, it is like that, because believe it or not, those people need to make money and eat food. Sometimes it's actually for reasons like putting graphics on the bottom or special sizing or colors or etc. And we're going to get into all that stuff. I actually wrote like a script, which is slightly unusual. I will probably not use it because I always don't use it. Anywho, I wanted to split this video into 3 sections, and the first one I want to start off with is aesthetics and pro models of scooter decks. So the first subsection that I have under aesthetics and pro models is finishes, and that's pretty self-explanatory, but basically the cost of a scooter deck can go up from painting, from anodizing, from clear coating, all the different types of finishes there are. Because some are more cost effective than others, like simply powder coating something is much cheaper than anodizing, I believe. You know, with that comes a price to pay with both, because usually a powder coat doesn't slide as great as a anodize will, because an anodize will stay hard and flat and will help you slide along things much easier than paint will. That's why usually when you paint your deck, it doesn't slide for the next like week. And along with that, I also wrote chroming, anodized, paint, powder coat, laser etching, just because those things also add expenses. Like details on decks can add expenses. For example, on the John Dev Pro model, there are all kinds of little hidden gems. Like on the head tube, there is like that little balloon face. And then there's a little graphic on the side with his name on it on both sides. And there's also the large graphic on the bottom. And all of those things, while seem simple to someone like you or I, are obviously something people pay for when they make that deck. And of course you may think like, oh, well, is it worth that so-and-so dollars more? And my argument will always be yes, because it supports the rider that you bought it from or for. Because obviously if you're buying a signature deck, in some way you probably like that rider, or they might be your favorite rider, or they might be someone who inspires you. So it's good to support that person, throw some extra bucks for a deck to, you know, support that person. So that section is pretty small. Now I'm going to move on to something more boring, which is production and location. So there are a bunch of different processes of making scooter decks when it comes to head tubes, when it comes to deck extrusions, when it comes to how a deck is cut, etc. So forged decks, so decks with a forged head tube will be more costly but stronger. And then a deck with an extruded head tube, meaning that it comes from a long extrusion just like a deck does, is cheaper to make, because then you can buy them in mass quantities and make them faster. But they aren't as strong, depending on how you make the extrusion. Because you can make an extrusion that has very wide walls, but is very heavy, but then is cheaper and as strong as a forged deck. So then you sacrifice weight for strength. I also have down labor, which is, you know, pretty obviously someone has to be building these decks and like, you know, putting the work behind it, or manning machines or whatever. And right after that, I have Taiwan is cheaper, but usually just as high quality as America, because a lot of scooter components are made in either China, Taiwan. It usually is cheaper to make them out there because it's really cheap to pay people out there, which is, some people will say immoral, but at the same time, that's just how it is over there. And it's actually, most of the time, it's cheaper to make something out there and ship it to and from the US than it is to just make something in the US. And usually they're just about the same quality. Like I would grade proto parts and tilt parts in the same quality spectrum as each other, because I think they're both great parts. but Proto is made in America and tilt parts are made in Taiwan. They're similar in price, and they both seem to work the exact same. So it's really whatever one looks good, or whoever rides for that company that you enjoy watching. It's really up to you. That usually is a very big factor in price for scooter decks, though, because if you notice, a deck like the Box Cutter is a $270 scooter deck that's completely made in America when it comes to the extrusions and the welds. Like, literally, scooter riders weld those decks, and then scooter riders ship those decks, and people who are very involved in scootering hello? Oh, hey, please do come in. What? Are you ready for me to speak? All right. And so my last section that I had written down was dimensions. And a lot of people don't understand why a longer deck is cheaper to massively produce than a wider deck. And typically a wider deck is much more difficult to massively produce because most companies already have a 5-inch wide extrusion ready to go in any length they want because they can cut it down after the deck is made. But with a wider deck, you have to design an entirely new extrusion, make sure the walls are strong enough to support someone typically from 300 pounds to like 150 pounds. So a wider extrusion also has to be weld ready for a head tube that was previously welded onto a 5x22 extrusion. There are multiple different steps that a company has to go to produce a wider deck, and it's usually very costly, and that's why they cost more money. With something like the Siren was made very cost effective, obviously because it's only $200, because some decks that are wider, like the TSI Box Cutter, are like $270.
That was the last trick. I waited for a moment where you wouldn't die.
All right, thank you. I love you. Like I briefly stated earlier, buying a 5-wide extrusion in massive lengths is much cheaper than buying multiple different widths extrusions. It's kind of the same way how it would be really cheap if a company could mass produce a shoe in one size, but instead, not everyone's foot is the same size, so you have to make tons of different sizes of shoe. So going back to pro models, some pros want also specific dimensions, like maybe they don't want a 5.5 or a 5-wide deck, but they want a 5.1 or a 5.2. And those specific extrusions as well will cost more money because you have to make them specifically instead of just saying, oh, well, let's just ask our manufacturer to add a 0.1 of an inch on each side of an extrusion, because it doesn't work like that. There are tons of things that go into making a scooter deck that are very unseen, because to the average scooter rider, it's just something you don't need to know, really, truly. All you really know to be a scooter rider is to go out and have fun. So like, you don't need any of this information, but it is crucial to know when you start asking the questions. I guess that was kind of my point. You think that's good?
Yeah.
I'm back.